Good evening again. Thank you for accepting this testimony. I'm here tonight as representing just myself. I wear a number of different hats, but the only hat I'm wearing tonight is the one that would go on my own head. The light item veto is a crucially important reform that the Rhode Island General Assembly needs to consider and ultimately implement. 44 other states in our great country have some form of line item veto. Of the 6 that don't, only one other state gives its governor as little power as ours does to have any role in the budgetary process once the original budget is drafted. In every other circumstance, 48 other governors have mechanisms available to them to have a role in the final look and feel and actuality of the budget. And Rhode Island does not. And I believe it kills us. I believe this speaks, in my own worldview, to separation of powers. It certainly speaks to a necessary check and balance that's missing here. John pointed out, when the budget includes things that are somewhat non-budgetary, like reorganizing the Board of Education, the voters deserve to have another set of eyes looking at these last-minute, late-at-night additions or subtractions, and be able to protect the best interests of the voters. When special interests are able to ram things through in the dead of night, and we have no recourse, that is a problem, and it is a problem here in this state. We could go on and on with examples of it. Now, my challenge as an advocate is, how do you provide a proof that something like the light item veto, or the lack of the light item veto, in this case, hurts us? And second of all, how do you present this concept to the general public so that they can A, put their head around it, and B, care? Mr. Chairman, earlier in the year you were receiving emails from constituents, statewide constituents, advocating and asking for you to implement the light item veto. We stopped sending them to you when the House sent the bill to the House Finance Committee, and I started bombarding the Senate Finance Chairman with those emails. So you haven't received the full set of 1,253 emails from Rhode Island voters asking you to implement the light item veto. And my apologies for that. We'll try and get you caught up on the ones that you missed. But what's you're very welcome, sir. But what's really important here is that you understand that people care. People want to see Rhode Island work and operate the way that other states do. When we don't, when we stand out in a way that is perceived or is in fact negative compared to the way the rest of the country operates its government, we need to make an adjustment. This is one of the problems with Rhode Island. Change comes hard here. But we need to show change at a faster pace than we've been doing so far, because we have a lot of ground to cover, and a lot of people are looking to you to make these changes. So how do you quantify it? How can I show you that the lack of the light item veto costs us, that not having the light item veto is bad? And I didn't know how to solve that problem until, out of the blue, some PhD professor from the UK, of all places, sent me an email. And he said, I saw your website. I just did a peer-reviewed paper that's going to be published in the Southern Economic Journal, of all places, that documents and proves that the lack of the light item veto costs the states economically that don't have it. Now, I sent to your legislative support organization the 53-page paper. It's titled "The Separation of Powers and the Tax Leveling in the United States." You gotta give the Brits, a little leeway there on how they do things. Now, I took calculus and I took multivariable calculus. They tortured me as a computer science major to take these things. There are equations in here that made my eyeballs bleed. I can't tell you what they were doing with the math that's in the back of this thing, like on page 44. And in my conversations with the researcher, I asked him to give me something that was a little bit more understandable. And hopefully you also received the one-page testimony that he wanted to get entered into the record tonight. It's marginally more understandable than what we got in the 53 pages. But I'm going to take the liberty really quickly of extracting from the one-pager the couple of key sentences that are in there. He starts out by saying that the light item veto is effective in bringing government spending down when compared with the block veto. And the block veto is not something that I do. The block veto is this idea where the governor can only approve or reject a budget or let it pass without signature. That's what the block veto is. At the last sentence in the third paragraph, he continues, "This is so because the block veto or its threat may more easily trigger a government shutdown." Now, of course, that's a more realistic possibility where you have more of a balance, political balance in the General Assembly than we have here, but you get the general idea. When your only options are essentially nuclear war or sign it, most governors would think long and hard before vetoing an entire budget over one or two issues that they don't like. In the next paragraph, he continues, "The only items that survive the budget process when you have a light item veto are those that benefit both the sitting governor and the legislative majorities." Now, why is that important? Well, I believe that's critically important here because the only elected official involved in the budget in any way, shape, and form with a statewide mandate to do something about it is the governor. The governor gets elected with many times the number of votes than any individual inside the General Assembly. And since in 44 other states, those governors have mandates and are empowered to have a role in the budgetary process, I believe it, A, makes sense, and B, we have plenty of empirical evidence that it works, that it does not bring governments down. And now we have the academic proof that shows that they can quantify the fact that it actually helps to save money. And in these times where we are looking at multi-hundred-million-dollar out-year budget deficits, some additional fiscal sanity is important to have, and the light item veto clearly, according to this researcher, lets that happen. He continues, "Even if the light item veto is seldom used once adopted, its threat is often enough to generate a slimmer budget." And then he continues again, and this is really important because I've heard in talking to individual legislators that this is a concern, and the concern is, well, the governor can run rampant, can actually increase spending, can do all kinds of crazy things. And what Dr. Megalades, I don't know how to say his last name. We've never spoken. What he says is, note that in this research paper, the light item veto is defined as a power to cut spending items. It is not and does not allow the governor to increase or reallocate spending in any way. And I think that's an important distinction because what I'm here to ask you for tonight and what the 1,250 people who sent their emails are not asking you to do tonight is to create, in effect, a monster. What we're asking for is a simple check and balance on the ability to strike individual spending lines from a budget. So I view this as, for me, on this effort, as the town of Burrowville was for the master lever. Because we had no way to really quantify the harm of the master lever until we looked at those ballots provided to us by the town of Burrowville, and then we were able to show you empirical evidence that showed that the master lever was misunderstood, wasn't used correctly, and it was incontrovertible. Now, I can't necessarily say the same thing about this study because, quite frankly, I don't understand it, other than what I just read to you in the abstract. And I was hoping John Merriam might have read it by now, because he's a lot smarter than I am with this stuff, and maybe he could have said, you know, that they're spot on and right. But if you think about it, logically, it does make sense. compromise is important. You all know that, because everything that a General Assembly does to a large extent lives and is part of the element of compromise. And I believe that adding this check and balance and adding another layer of compromise to the process is not a bad thing. That it is in fact a good thing. And anything that we can do to help control spending, solve the problem of our out-year budget deficits, strengthens us and helps us solve the fiscal crisis that we're still in, frankly, and that we're going to be in for several years, and in fact, to the foreseeable future, with the out-year budget deficits. So what I ask you to do here tonight is simple. I'm not asking you to pass a bill that puts in place a light item veto. I'm asking you to simply give the voters the chance to make this happen if in their wisdom, their collective wisdom, they believe this is important. Because I know what I'm asking you to do is hard, because this gives up a little bit of power. I'm asking the General Assembly to give up a little bit of power when it comes to the budget. I'm asking the General Assembly to make the way you operate look like the way 44 other states operate. But I'm not asking you to pass this. I'm asking you to put this on the ballot. And frankly, you don't really have the moral authority to not do it. It's crucially important that we bring the population, we bring the voting public into the process of setting up what our rules of operation look like. And what I'm asking you to do tonight is do something simple. Give the voters the chance to speak their minds and tell you how they would like you to conduct their business. It's simple, it's straightforward, it touches on everything we're talking about with the Ethics Commission. We, the voters, want a more transparent operation of this General Assembly, and we want it to work better than it is right now. And it can happen, right? I think the people are ready. I'm hoping that the arguments, if you can fight your way through this, make some sense. And the extract, I think, is help. It is logical, and it does make sense that compromise should help to bring down the level of spending. I think it's a really good thing, and I'll try and answer any questions you have, as long as you're not going to make me do any integrations here tonight.
Any questions or comments for this witness? Senator Metz.
Yeah, the only thing, Ken, I would say is the parts of my district has unemployment 44%. And when you campaign, you were over there quite a bit, so you're well aware of some of the social things. So some of the hardest thing for me is I'm not anti-business, but I also have to keep a balance with a social safety net. And so I really try to keep the balance, but there has been years where I'm the only red light voting against the budget. So my fear, for me, with this, and I do have a moral obligation to look out for my constituents, is a line item veto. What is this going to mean? Because I've seen it up there, I've been up there for years. The prison budget over the years will increase astronomically, and no one blinks an eye. But I try to get some more money for some poor people, and they argue with me tooth and nail. And trying to change public policy so that we're putting more in prevention, which means like the Fair Oil commercial. Maybe if we had all day caves and other things, we'd be spending less on the prison. So I'm trying to change the perception myself. What my fear is how is this going to benefit my constituents, or is it going to hurt them more? And so that would be my only fear.
I can't answer that question, obviously, because I'm not the governor, and some people are probably thankful for that. But, you know, what it really, I think the basic answer to your question is, even if the governor vetoes it, if the General Assembly shares your concern about whatever the particular budget element is, the line item is, they can override the bill. And so it actually gives, I'm glad you asked the question, because I think this is a fine, important point with the light item veto. The governor is not given dictatorial powers with this. The governor has the ability to strike the light item, and the General Assembly, in what I consider to be a remarkably transparent process, can formally go on the record and override on whatever budget elements are stricken by the governor. And I think that's important for a couple of reasons. So let's use the example that John brought up. where the education boards were merged in the dead of night. If that was in fact done with a budget line item, and I don't know everything about that, but assuming that it was, if the governor vetoed it, the General Assembly could override. But that override vote would be a really important one. First of all, the General Assembly would have more time to think about that issue. The governor could frame the argument of why it was vetoed. And then if you choose to override it, you do it with a public show of force. He's saying every individual legislator has to step up and say, I override and this is why, and I support this. And then your vote stands if it's overridden. And then the voters know you overrode it, and if there's a repercussion for that, so be it. But I think that's what democracy is all about. Democracy shouldn't be hiding a whole bunch of things in a gigantic budget and sliding it through and being done with it. You want to have the accountability. It's crucially important, and that piece of it is utterly missing from the way we do our budgets. And I can't overemphasize how important it is to have that final level of check and balance and accountability.
Yes, thank you, and Mr. Chairman.
Continue, Senator.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I bring that up, especially with the discussion about the cost of Medicare, the cost of states and our cost compared to everybody else, Bannister House in my district went back into receivership. So that has a long history in the African American community. It used to be the home for aged colored women down in Fox Point. Started about 1890. So when the colored ladies got too old and they couldn't no longer clean the houses, some of the rich benefactors would support this, get some charities to put them in this house until they died. And it turned into the Bannister House. So now Bannister House, which is their 125th anniversary on Thursday, they have some of the poorest patients that have, if I went in a nursing home, they would take my retirement, my Social Security. I have some other funds other than the Medicaid. So what happens, these patients are so poor that it costs more to take care of them than what they're reimbursed, and that's something that I'm going to have to get into in the future. So if they close down Bannister House, there's not going to be any place for these patients to go because just for economic reasons, some other homes may not take them. And then the families that live in the neighborhood don't have transportation, so they're not going to be able to visit their family members. And so those are some of the things that I'm worried about because I'm trying to help them to stay open. So in the line item budget, it's out of whack compared to other states, and if the governor, if we had it in place now, and you'd have to cut the cost, I understand that, but it would be devastating. Some communities more devastating than other communities. And so that's one of the things that we're working on now, trying to keep Bannister House open. And so, but that's the type of stuff that I have to deal with. I just wanted to share that.
You know, and I know you're aware, but in my software business, we deliver close to $8 billion a year in food stamp benefits to the poor, destitute, needy, and others in the state of Texas. I understand the importance of the social service safety net, and quite frankly, the fiscal instability that we are suffering from in this state is the biggest threat to the social service safety net that we have. We have to solve this problem. We have to become economically healthy. It's crucial. So I'm with you. And I agree that prevention is far better than dealing with the problems that come up through lack of prevention. So yeah, it's smart in every way to fund the effective programs that provide the help where it's necessary. But where we have these gigantic budget deficits, we are jeopardizing all of it. And we have to do a better job at getting a handle on it, and I believe the light item veto can do that. I don't believe, and I think there's very few places that I'm aware of, but I can't talk authoritatively, it's typically not used as an object of social warfare, for lack of a better way to put it, okay? I am not aware of that's the way that it's used, and this is Rhode Island. I can't imagine that that's the way it would be used here. I see it as a much more effective way to just make sure that what's coming out the door passes muster. And muster that I'm talking about passing is ultimately what the citizens of this state would consider just and correct.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. With that,